Welcome everybody. We're going to try to start on time so we can keep on schedule here. My name is Rob Quick. I'm going to be hopefully a relatively silent moderator, but we'll be here to help things out. I did want to welcome you to the Concurrent Session B. This is integrating functionality across domains and tools. We have 3 presentations, 1 live presentation to start things off, and then 2 pre-recorded presentations, but I see that all of the people who are representing them are here. So what we'll do is go for approximately 12 minutes for the presentations and then do 3 minutes of questions individual to each presenter. And then at the end, we'll have 15 minutes of a group discussion to see how to pull everything together and try to get some common discussion going around the 3 presentations. So let's see. Please do use the notes that are available, the shared notes that are in Kiko chat. Please, if you do have questions that pop up during the middle of a presentation, put them in chat and I will either ask you to unmute at the end of the chat or present those questions to the presenters. And I think we'll go into the first presentation. It is our net.science, cyber infrastructure for sustained innovation in network science and engineering. And that'll be done by Chris. And Chris, if you want to share your screen, you can take things away.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Let's see, let me move this over and I'll go into presentation mode. Okay, can you see the screen okay?
I can.
Great, okay, thanks. So this project is net.science. It's a cyber infrastructure for network science and engineering. The team members are down the left and right columns. My name is Chris Coleman. It shows up at the bottom. The 4 folks you see across the bottom are kind of leading this effort. Dustin is the lead architect, Madhav is the PI, and Ravi and I do a lot with the computational codes and some of the infrastructure, okay? So these are the topics we'll cover, some background and motivation, and then a quick overview. We'll take a look at some aspects of the cyber infrastructure fairly briefly, the software infrastructure, computational codes, the networks and data, and then we'll go into education and outreach and summarize. So right now, the cyber infrastructure can be accessed at net.science as shown at the top of the page, and all this cyber infrastructure is right now is 4 static web pages. And so what we'll be talking about is our work over this first year in getting the cyber infrastructure up and running, and talk just a little bit about how we're going forward. So we haven't quite completed the first year of a 5-year project, okay? So our motivation for doing this CI, first of all, networks themselves, they're ubiquitous. People interact with networks almost every day, if not every day, of some sort. There's wide academic interest in networks. A number of companies have their businesses predicated on interactions among people. And some of the examples are shown at the bottom of this slide. So the motivation for the cyber infrastructure, as we just saw in the previous slide, the wide use of networks is one, but the second aspect is a couple of observations, and that is many operations on networks are common across application domains. For example, computing connected components, the number of connected components on a graph, it can be done without regard for what the domain is, and then it's the analyst who interprets the results for the specific domain of interest. And so that's our general approach for this project, is that we want to build a general purpose cyber infrastructure for network science. And so this is from a user standpoint, we're focused on operations and computations, and then data, which are primarily networks. And we can handle domain specific types of codes. That's not a problem, but we want to make this as broadly appealing as possible. And so what we're trying to do is then say, okay, the analyst who runs the computation, it's their job to apply the meaning to the results that come out of the system. And so as far as we're aware, there's no general purpose network focused cyber infrastructure, but in fact, there are a lot of CIs, as people know. Exceeds has some 40 gateways or more, but none of them are devoted specifically to general purpose network science. And similarly for SGCI, there's about 600 gateways, and well over a dozen of them analyze networks for particular contexts. But again, we are trying to focus on a general purpose CI. Okay, and so the URL is shown at the top again. And for us, our cyber infrastructure is a combination of the web app, computational codes, data, primarily network and network related data, and then the software infrastructure. And so the system we're building is going to be open access and mostly open source. So the only time we wouldn't have it open source is if someone contributes a code, for example, and they say they don't want it released, then of course we're going to honor that. We talked about general purpose network science. And so the idea is to analyze and visualize primarily network data or network related data. What we're hoping to achieve is that producers and consumers are both motivated to come here because of its use and the ability to put new codes and data into the system that can hopefully attract users. So even contributors, for example, might come up with novel algorithms that they implement, and we hope that they would see value of contributing to this system, because we'll keep track of how often the system is used, so that they might use that, for example, for subsequent NSF proposals. And so clearly then we're also hoping to foster team science or provide a platform for team science. So here are the cyber infrastructure core components. At the top, we have the two green boxes. The left box is the Net Science web app. I spoke a little bit about a couple of slides back. The other green box is for external applications, for example, RStudio or Python notebooks, things of this nature. If we could drill down or go down one level, we have the Net Science API. This is the entry point into the computational backend, where we have core services, for example, file service, job management system, and user service for user authentication, as well as the computational codes. And on the left, we have supporting services such as the digital library, or digital librarian, which we'll look at in the next slide. And then down at the bottom, we have computational resources. Okay, and so this is just one view into the system to look at this digital librarian. So at the bottom of this graphic, again, we have these blue boxes representing different services. And on the top, we have the net.science API. And on the left, where the purpose of this slide is for the digital librarian, the blue box on the left, that it has access to all the digital objects in all of these different services, along with the metadata for each digital object. So it can access this data, manage the data, represent it in different ways to expose, in this case, search facilities for the user. So for example, they might want to search on what kind of codes exist for computing strongly and weakly connected components, or they might be interested in doing analyses on graphs of particular sizes with other types of properties in the graphs, so that this digital librarian then supports this type of searching. Okay, so these high-level features that we're working on right now are login and user management of managing user accounts. The web app, we just spoke about searching before of different types of digital objects. It will also have user interface screens for all the different computational codes, which will generate automatically. And then this notion of team science with viewing, plotting, sharing the data. As far as uploading into the system, in the shorter term, we're looking at networks and network type data. We'll say something about network type data in a few slides, in that people who contribute these types of artifacts, they'll have the ability to set the permissions on these objects. So for example, viewing the objects or whether they can download them and other types of settings. Then of course, there's a job service to run operations on networks, where right now we're looking at our back-end hardware being either high performance computing clusters and GPUs. So multi-core nodes and GPUs are hardware on the back end. And then we have the API, which the web app uses, and third-party code. So for example, we mentioned RStudio before, and Python notebooks would be examples of third-party codes that would directly access the API for more compute intensive operations rather than always going through the web app. So this is just to give a glimpse of the job service and how these computational codes exist within the system. So on the right, we have singularity containers, one for every code. We have the executable code in its environment. And then in the middle, we have the execution targets, excuse me, where the codes can be run. And on the left-hand side, we have input and output file specification, so that if someone submits a job, they specify inputs, for example. These input files that they specify will be compared against specifications, so that if the files aren't valid for the particular use, users will be notified upstream as far as possible, rather than having the job be submitted to a Slurm queue, for example, and then only find out something is wrong once the job starts, after it possibly has been setting in the queue for a while. Okay, so the early codes, the computational codes that perform operations on networks are shown here on the left-hand side. But rather than go through those, basically what we're trying to do is hit two categories of codes. And these are, again, just the early codes that we're dealing with. The one category is the high user base codes, okay? So people who do a network analysis, a lot of them, they're going to expect codes like Snap and the Network X libraries to be available because they have huge user bases. But on the right-hand side, we're also interested in putting novel codes in right away. And some examples of this are reliability, polynomials, SAT solvers. And so SAT solvers, you can download these codes and run them on your desktop. But as far as we know, or as far as we're aware, that there's no cyber infrastructure that has SAT solvers in them. And these are useful because a lot of different problems can be reduced to SAT problems that then can be solved and mapped back to the original problem. So these are codes that we're dealing with right now and inserting into the system. Another type of analysis on networks is structural analysis. So we're working with the Snap library and the Network X library. These codes need a little more attention because every code in the system has to run in its own address space as a standalone application, which means, for example, with Snap and 130 methods, we need a main method to go with each one of the library methods. And so we constructed a pipeline to automatically parse out comments and the method signatures, develop main methods in the pipeline so that we can perform these operations, get the codes that we need, and to put them into the system. And so we are working with Network X also. We have about 270 of those methods that we've generated thus far. And these are all going into the system. Another example of a computational code is Contagion Dynamics on networks. So, you know, an SIR model or SEIR model with the COVID epidemic, you know, is a prime example these days, but also social contagions like the spread of fads and things of this nature. So we start out, so we're using open source tools to the extent possible, right? We don't want to reinvent anything. So this EON code stands for Epidemics on Networks. We've modified the code to do other types of models that we're interested in and that are very common, for example, in the data mining literature. And so we've put together a small system here where the simulation model consists of the EON code that we modified. Then we have a data analysis code that takes the simulation output and puts it in forms for plotting. And then we have a plotting module where the users can generate publication quality plots. And a couple of examples are shown down here in the lower left.
Chris, just to interrupt you here, you have about 1 minute left.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the network categories, we have graph generators that are that come from the structural analysis codes. We're mining graph that exists on different web pages. And we're also generating data that then in the right box can be used to generate networks based on definitions of what those networks are, okay? So basically what we've talked about so far, and this is the last slide, is the education and outreach, okay? And so in 2020, we've worked on getting the cyber infrastructure, the basic functionality in, and we're going to release it to the public in 2021. We're also going to have network science courses taught with net.science CI, and the folks here are going to use that. And we have outreach operations going on where we're going to have workshops to demonstrate the CI, and we're also going to have a high school program in the summer of 2021. So I'll just leave it at that. Is that okay, Rob?
Great. Yep. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So we have 3 minutes for questions. If I didn't see anything come through the chat, but if anyone has a question they'd like to ask Chris, please speak up now. If not, I have a question that I'm curious about, but I'll let everybody else get a chance first.
Can I get in a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Arjun. Chris, thanks so much. The question is it possible to integrate tools that we have developed into NetScience?
Yes, we would have to talk to you about the specifics, but we specifically do want to integrate other codes. You noticed on one of the slides I mentioned as far as uploading networks and data. Mm-hmm. We do want to have users have the capability to upload their own codes. But as you can imagine, that is a much more difficult problem than uploading a data set, right? Because there's issues of how does it run, what kind of resources does it need, depending on what kind of inputs, parameters that users specify. And then there's always issues about security.
Yep.
So, but yes, we are going in that direction, but not like within the next year or so. So yes, we could talk after the meeting.
Sounds great. I'll get in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Arjun. It also looks like Mike Zentner has a question. Mike, you want to ask that, or would you like me to?
Sure, I can ask. Basically, I was curious about whether you have to use novel database architectures for the underlying data here to support large-scale computations, and if so, what are some of those database management systems you use?
Okay, so the database we use MongoDB for a lot of the architecture, but I think you're asking about how to store large size graphs, for example, in the system. And so what we are doing is we are using the approach that the Stanford people use with Snap. And basically they have a data type that's called a table. And basically the networks are stored as tables. So there's, let's say, a node file, and it can have, for each node, it can have any number of properties of floats, ints, strings, and same way with the edges that where you have, let's say, 2 nodes that form an edge, and then any number of properties on each edge. And so they have a number of different types of operations that come with their system. So, for example, doing different types of join operations. So if you have a multi-graph, you can separate the different layers of the graph in different files and then compile them or build them together, start doing union operations. And so that system scales right now to, I believe, very low, like 1 billion nodes, okay? And then more edges. And so we specifically looked around and we talked to the Stanford people about their capability and decided to go with that first. Hypergraphs will present their a slightly different issue when we get to that point. Does that answer your question at all?
Sure, and we need to move on, Chris. So Mike, if you have follow-ups, please feel free to contact Chris. And Chris, I actually have a question about how the digital library manages digital objects, but we don't have time for that now. So we'll either get back into that at the end of the session in the discussion, or maybe I can run into you sometime offline.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
We'll move on. And Roland, I did see you in the group. So Roland, you're up next with your Bring Your Own Plugin Management Middleware for Programmable Science. And I think Abe is actually going to start the video as this is pre-recorded, and then we'll, so I don't have to time this one because it's pre-recorded, and I assume that it's right at 12 minutes. So we'll have questions for Roland as soon as this video finishes up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roland Ruche, and this is the Bring Your Own Plugin Management Middleware for Programmable Science Gateways. The agenda today is that we're going to go through the introduction, the background on Science Gateways, present our solution approach, present the Science Neural case study, and our conclusion. Research today involves working on bold problems that require solutions that are multidisciplinary in nature. Recent science and engineering research tasks are increasingly becoming data intensive and relying on workflows to automate integration and analysis of voluminous data to test hypotheses. So the question is, how do we cater these requirements to non-computing experts and bridge knowledge gaps? Science gateways provide web-based portal interface to integrate scientific tools and data sets with domain-specific user interface customizations to help researchers and educators. They provide add-on features that can be customized for the execution of workflow and algorithms and automated analysis of voluminous data on distributed infrastructure and cloud resources. The tools are evolving, new data sets are rapidly emerging, and the complexity of interdisciplinary collaborations is increasing. Hence, there's a pent-up need for user interface guidance and workflow content-based training for Science Gateway users. To fully utilize Science Gateway capabilities, researchers from interdisciplinary domains are required to learn how to use fast-changing technology and navigate new data sources. Researchers require guided knowledge discovery at various levels to accomplish their research/education tasks. Provide guidance on using publications, tools, data sets, and cloud resources, and required learning platforms to train next generation expert professionals to learn, apply, create. Provide training using learning modules, pre-configured cyber infrastructures, and technical materials. As for our solution approach, existing science gateways with predefined workflows and interfaces and using fixed cloud resource infrastructures need to be transformed with modularity, decoupling science gateway application code that enables the addition of new services to operate independently but interconnect. The extensibility, the ability to easily integrate plugins, example recommender systems and execution pipelines involving AI, ML, and NLP algorithms. The scalability, the ability to deploy or run new plugins over federated local and multi-cloud resources, and the programmability to help program, register, and upload components into the existing setup using customizable interface. Previous works exceed the need to improve science gateways. The work in one provides a software suite to compose, manage, and execute large-scale applications and workflows on computational resources. Provides component interactions that are handled by web services. 2, supports the design and deployment of multi-cloud applications. It aims to optimize and customize the workflows of science gateways. The work in 3 leverages a popular Galaxy system for application hosting and workflow execution. It services for data transfer, user and group management, and authentication. It also provides elastic provisioning models specialized for public cloud resources. 4, is a framework that enables quick clients and servers to dynamically exchange protocol plugins. pQuick exposes functions as APIs for plugins. While these works seek the need to improve science gateways, they largely lack the capability for users to customize programmable plugins. Plugins require modular programming to maintain and deploy heterogeneous components. Our work focuses on the implementation of a multi-layered RESTful web service architecture for component interactions. Our middleware framework allows highly portable and reusable building blocks in next-generation science gateways. As for our solution design, we've integrated the Bring Your Own Plugin Management middleware onto a case study that is an end-to-end framework that provides management plugin capabilities for administrators and developers. The plugin management middleware provides many benefits. 1, it enables administrators and developers to modularize the plugin services used to develop microservices and Science Gateway applications. So we see that it supports plugins to independently operate by decoupling processes as microservices. It supports customizable design and deployment to augment scientific workflows. So we've containerized to construct deployment patterns across distributed resources to optimize those predefined workflows in science gateway domains such as neuroscience and bioinformatics. It also provides the flexibility for disparate code bases to be integrated through microservices. So therefore, it allows developers to use their preferred coding languages when they want to be able to create customizable science gateways. In light of presenting our SciNeural case study, we show the on-time recommend system. It's a novel recommender system prototype that comprises of several integrated recommender modules. It's integrated with SciNeural, which is a science gateway domain for neuroscience users to guide researchers for the ongoing research. Vidura Advisor is embedded with the on-time recommend as a context-aware chatbot that provides guided user interface with a step-by-step navigational support using AI and ML tools. The on-time recommend user interface provides a central resource hub with web interface to provide guided user experience to domain science gateway users. The recommender user interface provides recommendations through RESTful web services on various resources, which include tools, datasets, and expert cloud resources. It also provides a content-aware Vidura Advisor, as I previously mentioned, that provides intelligent guidance using Google Dialogflow and its Vidura services. With the Bring Your Own Plugin management interface, it provides the ability to add and manage recommender modules using plugin processes that are implemented as microservices. This is an example of the SciNeural Science Gateway domain that is used with on-time recommend. The Bring Your Own Plugin management, the plugins are implemented as recommender modules, as shown here. The plugin management integration for the on-time recommend encapsulates 5 different recommender modules. The first one is the domain-specific topic recommender. So therefore, it's able to guide novice and expert users towards identifying tools and data sets that are generally used in scientific domains. The publication recommender finds relevant publications is essential for the researcher who must cope with the exponential increase of scholarly material. The Jupyter Notebook, it decimates code and improves the science productivity by appropriate notebook suggestions. The Workflow Template Recommender suggests CI templates according to the research requirement to run certain algorithms. And lastly, the Scholar Finder finds relevant scholars who are suitable in accomplishing a research task across a scientific domain. We use this plugin management middleware in the SciNeural case study to show a series of steps. Step 1 is to register different recommender modules in on-time recommend using a plugin registry. Step 2 uses the plugin workflow manager to register scientific plugin processes to execute relevant recommenders on the on-time recommend. Step 3 is to add a Science Gateway client and link the recommender modules with the client to allow users to use recommenders on their Science Gateway interface. Step 4 is to configure the parameters of the recommender processes and queue the processes of the recommender modules for a specific Science Gateway client. And lastly, step 5, we execute the recommender processes using provided configurations and publish recommender outputs to end users on their Science Gateway interface. As for the conclusion, we propose a plugin management middleware framework to implement recommender modules for customizable Science Gateways. We showcase how on-time recommend case study can be used to configure relevant recommenders for Science Gateway users, in this case, SciNeural, to perform knowledge discovery. The plugin management approach can be generally applied to extend and scale the Science Gateways through a series of integration steps that are supported by our middleware through a web application. And the next generation of Science Gateways can be a one-point solution by featuring a guided knowledge discovery at various levels to accomplish research and education tasks for Science Gateway users, and learning platforms to train the next generation of expert professionals. As for future works, we plan to develop additional plugin support features in our middleware for, 1, the integration of chatbots for guided interfaces, and also the knowledge bases for intelligent data analytics and other science gateways, which include bioinformatics and health informatics. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Roland, for that pre-recorded presentation. Are you here to field some questions? You are. Okay, I see you there. Does anyone have any questions for Roland after the presentation?
Hi, Roland. Yes, I do have a question. Your presentation sounds very interesting. I was wondering, what is the status of your proposed framework for the pluggable middleware?
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, so the status right now for this project is that we're still, we're currently using what we've applied to the I guess the neuroscience science gateway domain, and we're looking to actually scale out to other domains. So I think, as I mentioned in the future works, we want to be able to apply our knowledge of using a plugin management middleware framework to other gateway domains such as bioinformatics, and also for the recent for COVID-19 for immunologists and healthcare professionals. I think we feel the need that as next generation science gateways are improving, we're able to find ways to manage that and provide feasible solutions for administrators and developers so that they can actually use it for various domains.
Okay, thank you.
So Roland, if someone has a recommender code that they're interested to bringing to your environment, are you at a point that you're accepting kind of external codes and getting involved with use cases from external partners potentially?
We are in the, I guess it hasn't been necessarily in the works of actually using or implementing, recommender modules or code from external partners. I think we're more so in the talks of getting that ready. There's definitely one thing that I haven't really addressed necessarily in the presentation, and that's kind of just the authentication for users to use our service. I think that's something that we are currently looking into to implement, as well as a few other things before we can actually get fully involved with external partners.
Sure. But is the goal then to finish up that authentication and the pieces and then release to general public for recommender modules?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Other questions anyone has? Okay, good. We only have 10 seconds left in the question period anyway. So why don't we go ahead and move on, and we'll look at the Improving Science Gateway Monitoring caveats and goals from Jeanette. And Abe, you have another video there for us?
Hi, my name is Jeanette Sperhack, and I'm here from Center for Computational Research at University of Buffalo. And I'm here to talk to you today about Science Gateway Monitoring using our existing application, XDMod, and how we're improving it for gateways now. As science gateways become more prominent in research computing, it becomes more important to understand who uses them and how. So I will outline some new gateways monitoring functionality we're adding to this existing tool. XDMod is an NSF-funded tool that collects and presents detailed data about computing resources. We developed it to help us manage our own computational resources at Center for Computational Research, and for 10 years the tool has been used to monitor NSF's Exceed portfolio. It's also available in an open source version for monitoring any computing resource. XDMod gathers data from various sources. For instance, accounting information about HPC jobs from resource managers, and virtual machine provisioning data from cloud computing platforms. These are all collected and aggregated together in the XDMod data warehouse. And then, from there, users can plot the metrics on accounting and performance data for their computational jobs. So what about gateway users and administrators? In previous versions of the tool, we were a little light on gateway-specific information, though there was some available, and some of it was obscured. Since high-level gateways monitoring is important to ensure access to gateways and to plan for its future acquisition, we are presently developing some enhancements to put gateway jobs on a more equal footing with other computational jobs in XDMod. So science gateways are usually portals to computing resources. They offer web-based user interfaces with curated applications for specific research communities, and they allow users to easily utilize high-performance cloud computing. The use of gateways has increased substantially for submission of HPC jobs. As you can see in this figure, gateways submitted 5 times more jobs. These blue bars are job counts on Exceed resources, 5 times more jobs in 2019 than in 2015. That's on Exceed resources. So there's a price to be paid for this simplicity and this ease of use, and its complexity. Science gateways help to make computing accessible, but they do this with the cost of that complexity under the covers. They're having to communicate with remote resources, stage and transfer data, queue computations, collect output, and so forth. So let's look at a specific example. The iTASR tool on the ZhangLab gateway is used for predicting protein structure and function. A very simple example of what this workflow does is it starts with the user inputting an amino acid sequence such as this fragment here. There's a lot of computation that occurs, and a modeled structure in 3D is proposed for this protein, and then biological function is inferred. This is pretty important. It can be used and has been used to model all the proteins produced by the COVID-19 genome, for instance. Now, behind the scenes, there's a lot of computational biology taking place. As you can see here, we've got a lot of things happening, such as threading and clustering algorithms, database searches, and energy minimizations. We're not concerned with this level of detail. Instead, let's back up a bit and say, here's the user's laptop. Here's the web server, which is representing the gateway itself. And this orange box is the HPC resource, in this case SDSC Comet, that is backing this gateway with computation. This is just an example of one gateway and how one of the workflows on it might work. So here's what happens. The user comes in, authenticates on the gateway, and passes in their amino acid sequence. That amino acid sequence is, the job is prepared by the gateway, submitted to the HPC resource, and then a cascade of jobs is kicked off that performs all of the different computational steps needed by this workflow. In the end, the results are returned to the user, but there are a great number of things that occur, including searches of other databases and so forth. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And again, this lends itself to the complexity. If we want to model, if we want to observe the weight of this job, the amount of computational resources that are consumed by it, we need to collect metadata, and all that metadata is scattered around. There is transferring of data, there is queuing of computations, and collection of results. So let's talk about what is involved and what XDMod needs to be able to represent that. We need user identity metadata, job metadata, and resource metadata. Now, there's a list of this in the paper, and I emphasize that you should look there if you'd like the full list, but let's look at it in pictures. User identity metadata looks like this. The user authenticates on the web server, which is the gateway itself, and so the gateway knows the user by some name. The computing resource knows the gateway by some other name. We need both of these names and identities to be able to parse out who submitted what jobs and when it was done and so forth. It's two pieces of the metadata. Additionally, there's the job metadata. So again, the gateway has a job ID that it knows this particular workflow as, and then Comet has a series of job IDs. As we discussed earlier, there's a cascade of jobs that take place in order to perform this computation for this workflow. So the suite of these job IDs comprises what is needed in the metadata that XDMod will want. There's resource metadata also associated, so submission times, so both timestamps and zones where these times are logged, the script name, the executable name, the resource and queue names. All of these things need to be collected so that we can fully account for what this job is doing. So the whole picture looks like this. Now, as far as the Exceed resources are concerned, Exceed dictates that a certain API is used to report these pieces of information. Those go into Exceed's central database, and XDMod gets them from there. We're endeavoring now to make sure that we properly account for all those pieces of metadata and use those to build a complete picture of the job. Now, what about the open source side? Well, something else that we're doing right now in XDMod is putting together a few reference implementations for typical gateway software so that software developers and managers can put together and assemble the proper metadata to fully describe their jobs. So aside from metadata, which we've been through in detail, there are other ease of use and access challenges presented in XDMod. There are a few things we need. For example, better metrics would be really helpful. At present, we have a few kinds of metrics that we're supporting up to now on the gateways, things like job counts. But we really would like to have some things like CPU usage. We'd like to have access to gateways metrics be a little more obvious on XDMod. We've obscured it a bit, even though it's there. So we're bringing that right to the front. We're going to make it easier for gateway jobs and users to be searched for. So all of these things have already been done. Let's talk about those. First of all, we made it easier to use by rolling out user role dashboards across the board on XDMod. That's going to be especially helpful for gateway PIs, and I'll show you that in a moment. Furthermore, drill down filtering and search by gateway end user is much more in force, and we have new gateway metrics. So here's the Gateway PI dashboard. I'm presently logged in as the PI for my gateway video, which is hosted at CCR. You can see here the wait hours per job for my video jobs, so the jobs that are submitted on my gateway as compared to other jobs submitted across the center. Over here, you can see a listing of all the recent jobs that were submitted by my gateway. We can see a general measure of how well they did with their CPU usage. And if I click through, I can see their detailed performance information, including time series plots. And then there's a small metric here shown in visual style with a job efficiency measure talking about the inefficient job counts my gateway has submitted lately. This is a metric that can be configured behind the scenes, but it gives me an eyeball sense of how things are going on my gateway. Similarly, we've put up dashboards of this style for Open On Demand, which itself is essentially a gateway. So these kinds of reporting can help you to manage your gateway going forward. Now, additionally, as I mentioned, we've got expanded gateway metrics. Here you can see exceed active gateway users and total CPU hours expended by them between 2015 and 2020. An easy plot to make now that you can see where to access and how to access these metrics on XDMod for gateways. Finally, here's another CPU hour plot. We've got a bar plot, the top 5 gateways in terms of CPU hours total consumption, first 3 quarters of this year, running only on the Comet resources. So we still have some things to do for XDMod and gateways. There are some ways in which we want to improve access for the end users. For example, we're working now on drilling down to gateway job performance data right out of the metrics. We're thinking about how to provide access by gateway username, since usernames on XDMod and usernames on gateways are not inherently tied to one another. We're trying to come up with a way to make this possible so that gateway users can ultimately have access to their own job details. And furthermore, as I mentioned, we're working hard to make sure that we're accounting properly for the metadata that we get either from Exceed, and then also to provide reference implementations so that the typical gateway software will and users of it can know how to report their metadata and get it into XDMod. So I want to thank the XDMod team who's worked so hard on all of this functionality and plenty of other features. We'd like to thank the NSF for supporting this project. And finally, this is where you can find us out in the world. OpenXDMod documentation if you would like to run it at your own center. open.xdmod.org. You can find source code, support, documentation, and so forth. The Exceed version of this software is here. There's a publicly accessible interface, as well as if you are an Exceed member, you can sign in and see more details. And finally, you can drop us a line here. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeanette, for the presentation. I know I see at least one question from Dave. Dave, do you want to unmute and ask your question to Jeanette?
Sure. Hi, Jeanette. It was a great presentation. Thank you. Any thoughts on reporting statistics from the gateway itself? Total number of logins, simultaneous logins, things that might help the gateway developer understand what parts of the gateway need to be improved.
Certainly, that is another thing that we have been considering, and we don't have any concrete plans for it just now. But that's certainly an issue for gateways, and deciding how to allocate your development time and resources. Right, when you're running a gateway, you want to know who's using these things and who's getting in there. I think most gateways collect this kind of statistics in one way or another. Certainly, you can go through your web server logs and so forth. But I agree that it would be of great interest to really kind of formalize this and make it possible to gather that information and present it in a metrics in metrics that can be explored in a tool. So I agree. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jeanette.
So other questions for Jeanette?
I neglected to mention that it's release 9 that is being discussed in the talk, and so the Exceed version of that is coming out next month.
Very good, very good. Other questions? If not, I will ask one here. So gathering metadata about jobs is useful. You've been doing it for this sole purpose of accounting, it sounds like, for that monitoring and accounting, but metadata on jobs and workflows is also useful in the general area of fair and fair data and reproducibility. Is the data that is used for monitoring and collecting these accounting type metrics, is that available in other forms and sources for other purposes, which I'll talk tomorrow about fair data and gateways, but it seems like there's quite a bit of overlap there.
So in other words, can researchers access these data and use them for their own analyses? Is this open to the public? Is that what you mean?
Sure.
Because we have done, yeah. So we have, I believe, on the order of a year ago, we first released an implementation of some functionality that allows people to go in and download different data sets. Now, to some degree, there are a couple things that are a little sensitive, so we have made them harder to get to. Things like the performance details of individual jobs. But general usage and job accounting information is available to anyone who wishes to download it. So, and that is a matter of interest for researchers. I agree.
Yeah, and as I said, there's also an aspect of provenance hidden in that monitoring data, right? So where it was done, what type of processors, what type of workflow it was done.
Absolutely.
Even software versions and such.
We have done a couple of, the team has done a couple of full workflow analyses for different resources and for Exceed itself. So this is really, it is something that you can learn a lot by looking into those data.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rob.
Very good. So I want to wrap up the specific questions for Jeanette, though. Everybody please stay online. I think what we'll do is open now for general discussion and general questions in the area of integrating functionality across various different gateway tools. And I wonder if anyone has any opening questions or thoughts that all three presenters could weigh in on about gateway tools. So I'll seed the pool here and ask each of the presenters if you can go one at a time, and I guess we can go in the order that you did your presentations. But is there a takeaway that you would think would be helpful for others in following in these general footsteps of creating tools for gateways? And we'll start there with Chris.
Sorry, I have to unmute. general takeaways from our work so far. Well, it's a bit difficult at this point. We're in the first year of the project. One of the first things we did was basically define the scope of the system. Okay, so for example, our target hardware platforms are commodity clusters or high performance computing clusters and GPUs. And right now we have ways to deal with running on cloud services, but that requires additional effort. And so we're pushing that down the road, but we have a way to deal with it. And so the biggest thing for us is to say, what is the minimal amount of functionality that we feel we need in the system to be able to release it as soon as possible, so that we get it out there and people can start using it and provide us feedback, so we have enough time in the project to make changes and modifications and not wait till the very end. So we're hoping to release it pretty early on in year 2, and that will give us, essentially 3.5 years to do that.
Great. And Chris, kind of a follow-up there. Is there anything unique to the network science type environment or codes that you had to handle specially?
Yes, I guess there's a difference between having a standalone code and libraries. I mentioned that very briefly, but I probably wasn't clear my explanation in the amount of time I had. But if you have a standalone code, for example, you can download something off the internet. It already is, you can execute it from the command line. Then putting that into the system is fast. Okay, you have the specifications for inputs, outputs, and things of this nature. Where more work is required is when you're trying to integrate an entire library that may have tens or hundreds of methods in it. And now the system wants each of these library functions to be its own standalone code. And this is where we developed this pipeline to read the comment section and the method signatures in the source code and then generate these main methods automatically. Okay, so there was some setup time to do that, but now once we have this type of approach, we use basically an intermediate representation like in compilers, and we can handle these types of codes in a straightforward fashion now. So it is different depending on whether it's a standalone code right out of the box or if it's a library with a lot of functionality.
Okay, great, thanks. And Roland, do you have a takeaway from the work that you would have the rest of the science communities or tips for the science communities who may be taking on projects that have some similarities?
Right. I think the takeaway that we've addressed in our work for this project, although the results may seem preliminary, is the idea of addressing to provide this plugin for predefined workflows and for Science Gateway users. So the core feature for us is that we're able to provide this plugin management middleware for many execution pipelines. So that would include AI, ML, and even natural language processing. But I think the bigger picture here, especially with the next generation of Science Gateways, is that tools are going to keep on evolving, and researchers are going to have to keep on keeping up with the voluminous amount of data that keeps coming in. So that poses a challenge for us specifically, because knowledge bases have to continue to be updated, and we're going to have to continue to configure our processes to allow users to queue on those plugins. But I think, like as I mentioned before, that's kind of what the future works that we're trying to address. So while we're able to address these kind of predefined workflows, I think, like I said, the bigger picture, or the scope, is that we need to continue to improve our system or our framework to allow for the increasing knowledge on these Science Gateway data configurations.
Yes, yes, data is going to be fun. Very good, thank you, Roland. Then Jeanette, I'll ask the same a version of the same question. Introducing accounting and monitoring on a systems as big as Exceed must be, you know, quite a diverse undertaking. But what general monitoring tips, if someone were not doing something the scale of Exceed, but we're wanting to put monitoring in place for a smaller type system or an individual gateway? Do you have any tips that would be useful for them?
Again, generalization is your friend, right? So it is true. So if you're going to build this from scratch, well, you don't want to build it from scratch. You want to use stuff that other people have done, right? So there are a lot of down in the details system monitoring. There are libraries, there are things you can use, but we do have an open source tool that can help you with this if you want to do this at home. So we do, you can do it too. But it's really kind of amazing how many ways we've found to solve all of these problems, isn't it? So these reference implementations are going to be entertaining. I mean, it's sort of like, here's the data we need. We're going to need to figure out how everybody submits this to their own log files or databases or whatever they do. But yes, generalization is your friend. How's that? That's going to be my my quick phrase. And if you want to monitor at home, you know, check out OpenXDMod. But
very good. Very good, thank you. And I'll stop asking questions and make sure the audience doesn't have any. I wanted to start the discussion. Does anybody have any follow-ups or anything that they'd like to know from the presentation? We have about 2 minutes left and before we sign off. Okay, then I guess I'll release everybody with those 2 minutes. I do want to say that after the break, so we're going up on a break period here at the half hour. After the break, there's some special events, a poster showcase, a sponsor exhibit. So please join them, and you can use them. You can navigate to them from the, I always forget the name of this, and I apologize, the Kiko homepage. So thanks everybody for attending. It was a great session. Thank you. Let's thank our presenters all together here as a group virtually. So I guess I'm the only one with video on, so you know you're getting, there's some claps going. Very good. Thank you all for attending and being part of the session, and I look forward to running into you as the week goes on.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, folks. Really appreciate it.
And thanks, Abe, for running the technical details there and making sure all the videos played smoothly.